All right, welcome back. We will start up again with our 6.9 1 p.m. consideration of Lake County PEG Board annual presentation by Supervisor Spatier.
Yes. And so we should be getting a document shared here. We do an annual PEG Board meeting. I'll try to convey the previous presenter, which was Ed Roby, who would continuously come to the county to present and let you know what's been done in the past years and what's being planned. Just to be blunt, this is part of the annual process in order to get the payments and dollars that come from each jurisdiction. I will also be doing the same presentation this evening for Lakeport, and have already done this presentation to the city of Clear Lake. So if we can move forward, please. And so here are our current board members. Some of it has changed since the last time. I should have probably updated that, but we have from Clear Lake, David Claffey, from Lakeport, Michael Froyo. I'm the representative for the County of Lake. We have replaced Brock Falkenberg with Kevin Mack, who also works for LCOE, who's their IT tech. Used to work over at Canocta Unified School District as well, and so has great expertise and understanding of both education and technical stuff. We are still looking for one more applicant to fill the vacancy that Denise Lustelo was no longer able to serve. So definitely please fill out an application if you are interested in joining PEG, or reach out and contact me and I'll help you out with the process. Our station manager is Thomas DeWalt. The station, as you may or may not know, is stationed over in the city of Clear Lake City Hall. And our chief editor is Adam Giordino. If we can move on. So our budget for 22-23, we are currently working on our budget. That should, the initial budget for 23-24 should come out next week during our meeting. But our revenues are $32,500 from the city of Clear Lake, $8,000, city of Lakeport, $2,000, county of Lake, $15,000. That's under the agreement that we currently have. And if we can move on to the next. Our expenses are $33,000. As you could see, it is $500 more than our current revenues. So we're trying to work on those things. Our station manager gets paid $12,000 a year, our editor $4,800 a year, and our facilities and insurance costs us $8,000 total. And the work that we've been doing that you remember in January, I think it was January, I approached the board with a work to provide videography for the MAX. That was part of trying to enhance our revenues as well. And as an update, this Monday we have all of the equipment. I know that Sam Houston's been working really hard, as well as Thomas DeWalt, to put it all together. We will be doing our first test of all of the equipment this Monday at the PEG TV. We want to make sure to streamline it and getting at as smooth as possible before we start working with the MAX. And it has taken us a while to not only collect and get everything approved by the board as far as all of the equipment needed for the MAC videography system, but it's also been putting all the equipment together. As you know, Sam Houston is a very busy individual, and so is Thomas DeWalt, and so finding the time to be able to put it all together has taken some time. So we have not yet started that. If you can move on, please. Then we have a capital budget. The capital budget is a 1% pass-through. The 1% comes from the Mediacom cable bills. We currently get approximately $58,250 per year for that. And our expenses at this moment is $64,938 that we had anticipated. We still have approximately $300,000 in that capital budget. So while you do see that the expenses are higher than the revenue, we've collected quite a large sum to purchase equipment. We could only use capital budget for equipment purposes or potentially purchasing of other things. I know there was talks in the past to get a van in order to move the equipment, things like that, but not for operational budgets. Our current activities is to support local events. We do have a sound system that is available to every jurisdiction, the one who uses it the most, but we keep offering it to ensure everyone else can access it, is the city of Clear Lake. It does come with a sound man or sound person who understands and has the technical know-how to work the sound equipment, because it is not just a plug and play. It is a very professional system. We are offering that videography for the MAX through the mobile AV unit. and we're doing our best to create new revenues so that we can continue with the current agreement and not have to request our jurisdictions, both cities and the county, to increase their contributions. We did create a new website like pegtv.com, where you'll find all of our stuff that we have recorded, whether that be Lake Life, whether that be our meetings right here that we're doing currently, the City of Clear Lakes, or other meetings that we are recording and putting out on our Zoom and other affiliated sites. For future activities, obviously, we want to fill our vacant seats. It's always nice to have a full board and also make sure that we have a quorum when we meet. We are always attempting to work with schools. It's been our goal in the past. The problem with schools is to keep the staffing that understands and wants to engage with PEG TV. With Kevin Mack coming on board, I think that we have some added extra momentum to hopefully get some of those things started. But again, it's about continuity and ensuring that that can happen. Talk to you about increasing our operational budget. We're always increasing our membership and viewers. In fact, our online stuff that we've been doing is very easy to track and definitely showing that there's more and more people that are paying attention to what we're posting up on our website. And we have been working really hard, especially I would say more so in the last 6 months after getting all of the equipment required by Lakeport City Council for their chambers to also be able to go and live feed directly to PEG so that their city council board or city council meetings can be live streamed for their constituents, just like it is right now for ours. And that is pretty much the PEG update that I wanted to give for you, and if you have any questions or comments.
What are the requirements for one of the vacant seats, or is it just?
No requirements whatsoever. The open seat is public member. I believe that both of them are public member. I don't know that the one for education is forcefully meant to be education, but we wanted to make sure to continue to have education with a seat to get their perspective and their connections for that.
Supervisor Green?
Yeah, on the third slide, I see the cities and the county, about 7,500 in revenues that's not earmarked out of the total. Is that memberships or something like that, just lesser income?
I'm sorry, what was that?
On the third slide, total revenues 32.5. I'm counting about 25 total as listed for the cities and the county. So maybe there's about 7,500.
We do get some donations, and we do have some memberships, and so there is additional income that comes in. I didn't put all the line items for our revenues, but yes, I put all the major expenses and the major revenues.
And then the potential for videography agreements, certainly cool when people have the technical skills. Is that limited to like public agencies that would contract, or private parties can reach videography agreements as well?
So we are working on agreements to go outside of government contracts and education contracts. The idea being that if you get us for the work, the content will come back to PEG. In fact, we did have a meeting a while back with our museums who wanted us to purchase equipment to do videography for, I forget what the exact title of it, but it was history-based interviews with folks from our community. But they were nervous about providing us the content to put back on PEG. They wanted to keep it for themselves, and we weren't able to approve that because it doesn't make sense for PEG to provide funding for something that doesn't return to PEG. Our goal is to provide content to the community about the community, or just content made by the community, and so we weren't able to meet those guidelines. So as long as there's content that comes back to PEG, yes, we are working so that it goes outside of nonprofit, outside of government and education entities.
If you could reach, for example, a licensing agreement, Creative Commons or something like that, there's nothing currently that would prohibit content posting on the PEG platform, but a third party that wanted to get some content posting on their website or platform or something like that. Does PEG have the ability right now to either license through Creative Commons or create an agreement where you can do dual posting to PEG and then whatever the other person wants to post on?
I got a little lost
Okay.
with the echo that suddenly was in my ear. Let's have a conversation about that. I don't, content needs to obviously be made by individuals. We definitely don't want to break any copyright rules. There are, like, some of the things that you see when we're on break or when we're at lunch, those are all copyright-free sourced materials that we can utilize and put on PEG, or we got the rights to putting it on PEG because it was created content locally, or content created locally. But we do want to follow copyright laws, and so anything that's ours, we also have the ability to maybe provide to others to showcase. But again, let's have that conversation, because I think the details are important. And so
Yeah.
everything is different.
I totally look forward to a conversation on that. It's similar to, KPFZ, they have stuff goes out over the airs, goes out over the stream, but certain programmers may want to podcast it or put some of those assets on different platforms. So I see it kind of in that same realm. We can absolutely serve multiple platforms with content. So thank you for that info, and maybe we'll take a side discussion.
Yep.
Okay. Have anyone from the public? I just need to get promoted to panelist. Oh, no, I was late.
And while we're waiting for that, just want to add, we are always looking for content creators. You can approach PEG TV. We do have equipment that can be leased from us, so that you can go ahead and make that content. That is our number one goal, is without the content, the entertainment value of PEG TV lacks. And while it's amazing that we can put our meetings and other council member meetings, maybe that is not the average entertainment that folks are looking for. It does keep you informed, but we are definitely looking for local videographers, video editors, and more to participate in PEG TV.
Okay, I'm going to close public input. I'm not seeing any, and bring it back. This is discussion only.
presentation.
Okay, all right. Well, then we
And
will.
after this, I will be going to the admin office to look for a check. Which is, I believe, what Ed Roby used to do.
Okay. So then we can take up item 4.1, the extra item. We ready for that? Yeah. Consideration of extra item, we did that. Consideration of letter to Kearns and West regarding the Russian River Water Forum.
Okay. Yes, I put this together after our meeting yesterday. We had, well, actually before. I had a call from some folks from Lake Pillsbury Alliance, and they noticed on the roster for the Russian River Water Forum, and the first meeting's on May 17th in Ukiah. They noticed on the roster that Lake Pillsbury Alliance was listed as the secondary or alternate. Well, myself and Supervisor Sabatier are commonly the primary or the alternate, and we had requested from the Russian River Water Forum that they allow Lake Pillsbury Alliance to have their own seat at the table. Commonly, it's basically Lake County, kind of with all of the other interested stakeholders and parties that, it doesn't seem like there's any more than one lake representative, and we just feel that there should be another. And they should have their own preference with they're actually the area where the headwaters, are, I guess, accumulated from the Berryessa Snow Mountain and the hills. So when the water flows, either it's Russian River or Eel, they don't consider this basin. So we feel that it should be. Basically, the letter just asks that they allow Lake Pillsbury Alliance to have their own seat. This all came from, we all met with myself, Supervisor Sabatier, and Anita Grant, when she was here, met with Kearns and West. They took all of the stakeholders' comments, interests, history of the Potter Valley project, and just took into consideration what we thought of it, and then collaborated this other group. So that's basically what this letter is requesting.
Supervisor Spatier.
And I want to add something that I know Supervisor Crandall and myself discussed this the other day, yesterday, I believe it was. And one of the key points that I think is important is we appreciate Lake Pillsbury Alliance and their voice, but to be an alternate to Lake County, they can't speak for Lake County. And that I think is where that's problematic, but we also want to see multiple seats being able to represent Lake County, and the way that Supervisor Crandall is proposing this, I am in full support.
Supervisor Green.
Yeah, supporting the item as it's brought, but man, this is light on Lake County. So just a question, no limit on tribal seats, but I don't see Lake County represented there. Is that a territorial thing, or?
The territory for the area, I think it's, I thought it was Upper Lake at first, the Hebe tribe. And then I found out the area for artifacts and, any type of tribal historic preservation area, the maps shows Robinson, but I kind of consider it both of the tribes per se, but again, they haven't been at the table. I've talked to both tribes, still hasn't come to a situation with that.
All right.
And so a lot of the tribes on the Russian River area are starting to come to the table, but that's, of course, Mendocino County tribes, so, yeah.
Okay, anything from the public? We're not seeing any hands up. Bring it back to the board for action.
So, let's see. Where did I put? Madam Chair, I move to approve the letter to Kearns and West confirming that Lake Pillsbury Alliance is not ideal as an alternative for Lake County and should be considered as a member to the Russian River Water Forum Planning Group.
Second.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
If I may add, and authorize the chair to sign said letter.
Oh, yes. I thought I put
Second.
that in there.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
Thanks, Lloyd.
Or else it would have no signature.
Okay. We can do calendars now. Who is ready?
Well,
I'll go ahead and go.
Okay.
So, just want to report, did go on a site visit last week with PG&E, out to the PG&E site in South County. Every year they have, and this is out on the Butts Canyon GI Thermal site out on Butts Canyon that is monitored by PG&E at this point. But they were out there doing some work with our, I think it's the ag mechanics, the ag class, went out and did a bunch of testing, obviously, of the local species out there, looking at, the botany, the flower, everything that's happening out there, kind of giving a tour also and talking about the science of monitoring that site. So that was a good site visit. I've been on the site plenty of times, obviously saw it before and in its current condition, but that was a good day to spend out there with the young youth. Obviously always talking about opportunities with the sciences, through the ag department, so that was a good one. Just spend time with the kids, and also the PG&E site. I did see something that I did not know they had out there. They have a large water storage facility out there. I think they work with CAL FIRE. There may be some potential for that. No, they got a big water tank off to the side, so I'm not sure what they're doing with that, but it's water storage. And we're always thinking about other places to get water during fires, so there is something there. So enjoyed that. Obviously, always take opportunities with PG&E or any other things that, with all the work that they're doing here in Lake County, obviously, and concerns we have. So anyway, spent time with them on Friday, which was the 28th. Had a short call with CAO, but then moved into the weekend, and let's see, what was the 29th? 29th, I attended my event in Sacramento. on the 30th, spent time here, and
How was your walk?
the walk was good. Yeah, it was, hey, great time to do it because it wasn't too hot. But a lot of support, a lot of things. It was not 105 degrees over there, so that was good. And a great turnout for the event. This week, obviously, just back here with the board meeting on Tuesday. Obviously, we have our meeting tomorrow, our workshop. We'll make sure to be there right on time, and it was confirmed. I was coming to Lakeport for a minute. I went right past that, did everything else. I'm like, oh man, it is in Lower Lake. So appreciate that. They have started the project in the cemetery in Lower Lake, the one with the Lower Lake Action Committee group. There is some work being done there. You know, there's going to be, I can't remember how many trees, but quite a few coming down just to help that area. The Lower Lake Cemetery District and other things in that area have, you know, always been something that has been brought up as an issue in there. So I'm glad that we're able to get some of the work done. I know the Lower Lake Action Committee group, Russ Kramer, is working closely with some other organizations to get it cleared out there. It's one of the larger ones in Lake County, and, you know, it's just glad to see that work being done. And it's so close to the school there too, with some of the other trees kind of bordering those lines. So excited to see that work done in South Lake County. And so, yeah, I don't think I got anything else at this point. So for some reason, everything slipped my mind. If I remember something, I'll go from there.
You're golfing.
Yeah, well, I do have golfing this weekend, but it's all right.
My turn? Not on my calendar, but we did get notification today through a press release from U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service that the pending application to emergency list the Clear Lake hitch is endangered under federal law will not happen. U.S. Fish and Wildlife has decided not to do that. They are continuing their ongoing reanalysis of all things Clear Lake hitch. They are still the lead agency for the Clear Lake hitch strategy agreement. And in their press release, they do note they've allocated funding to continue that work. And so it is a little bit of news today, and but that is not going to change anything as far as their ongoing listing investigation. Certainly doesn't change anything as far as our county's commitment to move forward on this. And so just wanted to highlight that. On tonight, looks like Senator McGuire will be having a Zoom town hall talking about wildfire on this time. So you can probably find him on Facebook and also on his State Senate webpage. You'll be able to watch that. And that is from 6:30 to 8 p.m. tonight. So if you're interested in wildfire, Senator McGuire wants to hear from you. Tomorrow, we're having our special meeting for the Rules of Procedure down in Lower Lake. Looking forward to that. I see a meeting on Thursday for Continuum of Care. I don't know that I've seen an agenda yet. Friday, the event that was mentioned this morning for missing and murdered Indigenous people today, I did hear Tribal Health. I had the wrong address, so I just want to clarify for people. It's at the Parallel Drive location. That will be happening on Friday, 1950 Parallel Drive here in Lakeport, and that runs from 2 to 7 on Friday. And that is about what I got.
Go ahead.
Just kind of want to go over a couple of things from what I did last week. I know that I have been invited to be a part of the Technology Governance Committee, which I appreciate being at the table for the discussions they're having. We're reviewing our email policy. Everyone seems to be holding on to their emails, including ones that, do you want to go out to lunch type of emails. And it makes it really difficult when we get PRAs where there's 10,000 emails to go through and maybe 100 of them are relevant to the search that we're doing. And so we're trying to figure out policy that would help to eliminate how much of an effort it takes when a PRA comes in. Difficult conversation to go through, having to think of everyone's different state guidelines on what to keep, how long to keep, and things like that. But I think that we're making some headway to figure out what an email policy might look like. In First Lake Commission, we were reviewing our budget in that week for 23-24. And part of the emphasis for First Five, one of the biggest factors and issues for being prepared for school is the social emotional situation with our kids. And so we will be focusing on that and looking to provide grant funding to those able to provide services to help the 0 to 5 with that. So I do want to at least prepare the board. I think we'll be okay, but we'll see what happens. Justin Gaddy, who is the current executive director of Hope Rising, has submitted his resignation letter. He will be resigning on May 12th. We do have some important programs that Hope Rising is still a part of, especially what Tina Scott brought to us, the Smart Start Bright Future, which focused on Canoctown Unified School District to provide different pillars from after school for our elementary schools all the way to 10,000 Degrees, a agency that supports and provides information and speaks to our high school students about going to college. Those things need to continue. As you know, we were working with Senator McGuire to get that program started. There is funding left over, and there is somebody from Wayto Wellville who is willing to take on that role temporarily until we do find an executive officer for Hope Rising. Just wanted to at least alert you that there may be a few hiccups as we do the transition. Also, Hope Rising was in charge of Hope Center in the city of Clear Lake. That hopefully before Justin Gaddy's final day will have been transferred to Adventist Health. We've been working on that for the last, I want to say, 5 or 6 months to get everything aligned. And so Adventist Health will be taking over Hope Center in the city of Clear Lake, and I appreciate the hospital willing to provide such a service for the community as well.
They're going to take it over permanently?
Yeah, they own the building already, but they weren't the ones providing the services. All those funds were coming through us, through behavioral health, but now they will be taking that over. So that'll be their second shelter that they are now running, with the first one being Project Restoration in Lower Lake. So that's a brief summary of last week. This evening, I will be in the city of Lakeport doing the same PEG presentation I provided to this board. Tomorrow looks like a busy day, and then right after 3 o'clock, if we finish at 3 o'clock, there is an invitation to continue speaking about some housing opportunities. So I'll be taking part in that meeting. And on Thursday, starting off my day as usual with the judge's breakfast, I'm meeting with the city of Clear Lake. We got an initial design for the skate park. I will be blunt, I am not super excited about the initial design. Let's see if we can get some extra things added in and make it a little bit more attractive, but looking forward to those discussions, and obviously the end product will be the end product. Right now it's still in the design phase. There is a Blue Zone Steering Committee meeting that I will be taking part of, and there is a Continuum of Care meeting later on that afternoon, and the agenda did come out, I believe, not yesterday, maybe it was yesterday, but I know that the agenda has been provided. And then that evening, I'll be at the City of Clear Lake City Council meeting just to keep up with what's going on there. On Friday, I am meeting with some Blue Zones members as well as some other entities to continue talking about, and I'll be very cryptic, just something I'm going to be bringing to the Board of Supervisors. I'm hoping on, is it May 9th, May 5th? 16th, it'll be one of those. But that'll be coming back, so I think that's all I have, and I lost track of where I was on my calendar here. Saturday will be the Robert Viramontes Soapbox Derby, Robert Viramontes Memorial Soapbox Derby that will be happening in the city of Clear Lake. When we punched Dam Road Extension from the courthouse and the college area all the way to 18th Avenue, closer to where the hospital is, that was a nice downhill, and our first thought was this would be really fun to do a soapbox derby on. Eventually the soapbox derby started, and annually there is a wonderful fun day of racing down the hill. And if your brakes don't work, don't worry, there's hay bales, but hopefully the breaks should work. But it's a fun day. Be there at 7:30 in the morning to 9 a.m. if you want to register and get your vehicles inspected, and then expect us to get started at around 9 o'clock with the downhill races. And then I'll be back here on Monday to discuss our agenda with our CAO. I have a PEG board meeting on that evening. It should be in the city of Clear Lake. And again, we will be practicing using the AV unit that we have been discussing, and then back here on Tuesday.
All right, special Board of Supervisors meeting tomorrow in Lower Lake. I'm glad I know that now, because I one time parked here like at 8:45 and ended up, so I'm just glad I know. So East Region Town Hall following that. CSA number 2 Spring Valley, I haven't been to a couple of them, so I want to make sure I get to this one, definitely. Thursday, I have an event at the Upper Lake Middle School. It's in regard to Native American adolescents, and it's like a motivational day, so I'll go and speak there. Friday, of course, I have the NACO leadership course that I'm taking. Also going to the Lake County Tribal Health event for missing and murdered Indigenous women's and peoples. Monday, CAO meeting, and in the evening, the first CERF meeting will take place, basically to just, get everything started, determine their dates to, meet, determine who's the officers, things of that nature, just to get rolling. So, and then back here Tuesday.
Okay. Tomorrow, I'm going to Lower Lake. Sounds like you guys are going to meet me there.
Good to know we'll all be in the same place.
Yeah.
Thursday, the Soda Bay Corridor Project, which was our Fire Safe Council evacuation grant for the Soda Bay Corridor, is underway, so we're meeting with that contractor. And then we've got a meeting with Cal OES about the CDAA tree mortality funds. Then another meeting with our climate resiliency officer and Director De Leon and I think, is she in here? We're supposed to be adding Chief Duncan to that too, a discussion about the air curtain burner. I'm going to try and make the Blue Zones meeting too this time. Friday morning, I have a zone of benefit meeting, which I may or may not be able to make, but I've already discussed that with Director Turner. And then I am going on a District 5 tour with Ben Rinkelman, so I'm really excited about that. I'm going to show him all my great places in D5. Saturday is a hugely exciting day in Cobb. The Bike Monkey 8-hour race is coming back for the second time since the Valley Fire, so this will be year 2 on the new trails. Starts at 8 a.m., goes until 5 p.m. You can start your last lap at 4. You want to get as many laps as you can in that time frame. And so we've got all ages racing, all different categories, including my child, who's going to be doing that with some of her friends, and also her coaches are on another relay team, so it's going to be really fun. And then Sunday are the state championship. It's the champ race for the NorCal League, and all but 2 of the high schoolers from the Middletown Composite team, which includes Lower Lake too, and actually it's open to all kids, all high schoolers and middle schoolers in the county. So all but 2 made it to the state champ ride, so that'll be Sunday. And then back here, I've got my meeting with CAO Parker, but I thought I had something else Monday afternoon, but maybe I'm getting all my Mondays mixed up. And then back on Tuesday. So then we've got our 1:30 item. Does anybody need to take a break before we get into this? We're good? Okay.
You got 30 more minutes based on your dream.
Yep. Okay. Okay, well, come on up, Director Turner, and get to the item. This is our 6:10 item, 1:30 p.m. public hearing, continued from April 18th and April 25th, 2023. Consideration of draft ordinance amending Chapter 5 of the Lake County Code, relating to exempt agricultural building permitting for temporary hoop structures for horticulture and crop protection, brought to us by Community Development and Director Turner.
I know. My seat is diminutive, but I am not. Good afternoon. Mireya Turner, Director for Community Development. Also, I have our Chief Building Official here, Bill Collins. Johanna just passed out a diagram that I will address shortly. On April 18th, the board directed in a public hearing that staff separate the section of the resolution of intent wording for the proposed ordinance to amend the zoning ordinance, separate out the section that was for temporary hoop structures for cultivation and move forward with that as its own draft ordinance, while the other sections of the potential amendments were going through environmental review separately. So that draft amendment or that draft ordinance was presented to you at the next week's meeting, which was last Tuesday. And I'm sorry I was out ill. I slept through the whole thing, but I watched it later. So thank you for powering through in my absence. And at that meeting, there were a number of topics of discussion that you'll now see reflected in the draft, the further amended draft ordinance that you have before you today. The areas of discussion were whether or not this ordinance would apply to all agriculture or just cannabis. Discussion on acceptable tubing materials, aluminum versus PVC or. The spacing of the hoop structures, and the addition of surety bonds similar to those that are required for hemp. Regarding the all agriculture versus cannabis only, currently in our Chapter 5, we require a building permit for any structure over 120 square feet. These include any agricultural buildings, residential, commercial, industrial, any type of structure over 120 square feet requires a building permit, except for one category currently housed in Chapter 5, which is our agricultural exempt structures, which is typically our barns, limited to storage of farming implements, feed, livestock, chickens, cows. They can all stay in there too. That's the only one that is exempt. It has certain criteria, including minimum lot size, things like that. And then if the applicant meets all those, if the proposed structure meets all those criteria, then it is issued an exempt building permit or an agricultural exempt building permit. They do not have to pay the fees for a building permit. They're only pretty much paying for a zoning clearance so that planning and it can make sure that the involved stakeholder agencies such as EH, Water Resources have all signed off on it. The draft ordinance you have before you today would create another type of agriculturally exempt structure. This would be temporary hoop structures used for horticulture and crop protection. Now, it's important to note that this draft ordinance it contains criteria and requirements that are placed there to get gleaned from a number of other counties, but also sort of distilled through the review of our building division to make sure that these structures would achieve minimal safety requirements. Because keep in mind, this would also, if you have an exempt agriculture building permit, then that means we don't have engineered plans to make sure that your building is supposed to be or designed to be constructed safely, nor do we perform any inspections to make sure that that structure is safe and meets code. And so the criteria that we'll go over that are listed in the ordinance are there to ensure safety. One of the, I know that last week, the board's direction was to have this apply to cannabis only, which I actually sort of set aside that direction so far. I mean, it can be easily changed by just adding wording, clarifying wording in the ordinance. However, the way it was originally worded, by creating a second type of exempt building permits, it can benefit more commercial agriculture than just cannabis. And so it would create an opportunity for other farmers, should they want a hoop structure temporary, if they can meet the minimum health and safety requirements or criterias, then they also would qualify for an exempt permit. At this point, to add if the board would like us to add that specifying language to limit it only to cannabis, then that means anybody who's not cannabis would just need building permits. Additionally, it's also important to note that the health and safety criteria here may result in a not one-size-fits-all. There may be cannabis or other types of farming businesses that have projects that will not fit the criteria that are listed in here. And so the building permit option would still be available for those. Moving on to the accepted tubing material. Again, this criteria, that the development standards that were listed are there for minimum health and safety. Specifically, the PVC or similar tubing, there was wording, we added wording clarifying PVC or similar plastic tubing, because in the event that one of these structures collapses while somebody's watering their plants inside, the PVC is a lighter material. It's more likely that a person can fight their way out of this structure if they're not getting hit by something that's aluminum and heavier. And so that's why the PVC was listed specifically in there. And just for clarification, since it seemed up to interpretation the way it was worded last week, that's why it has been changed to be PVC or similar plastic. Next one, spacing of hoop structures. The Cannabis Task Force started with the resolution of intent, which listed 10-foot spacing in between hoop structures. The fire district personnel that were there were amenable to reducing that to 3 feet in between hoop structures, with a caveat that was not included in last week's wording. If you refer to the diagram that Johanna passed out, you'll see that there are 2 rows of hoops, and I brought extra copies for public. Bill, would you put that on the podium, please? There are 2 rows for hoops, and then there are 4290 compliant rows in between those. That is a detail that I have wording to recommend be added into the ordinance, so that we don't have thousands of feet of endless rows of hoop structures without any spacing in between them that would allow for emergency personnel to access the exact location for an emergency. We need the water hoses to be able to get to a fire. We need our EMTs or our fire personnel to be able to reach someone who's having an emergency. And so the recommended additional wording is for section 6.25.2.6. And it's to add a clause so that that section will read as follows. Multiple structures have a 3-foot minimum fire separation distance between structures, with a maximum distance from any exterior portion of the structure of no more than 150 feet from a compliant fire access road. This wording, this sentence, is taken straight out of the California Fire Code, section 503.1.1, which I would recommend adding as a citation into the wording, into the ordinance. The next topic is surety bonds. The board directed staff to add wording requiring surety bonds similar to the hemp. And so rather than citing the hemp surety bonds, that wording has been added directly into the ordinance as it is before you today. Additional clarifying language was for existing cannabis permittees, for those who have undergone CEQA review for cultivation areas. If you've had your permit approved, your major use permit for cannabis cultivation, it's gone through extensive, rigorous CEQA evaluation, and the conditions of approval allow for the activity within the already approved areas. So those are your site plans. They show the cultivation area as well as the canopy area. And any area outside of that has not necessarily undergone the CEQA review to determine impacts of the project and the activity on that land. So I am requesting an amendment to section 6.25.1.c to read as follows. And this clause just comes in at the very end. But in addition to those conducting agricultural operations, applicants with an approved cannabis cultivation permit from the County of Lake are eligible to apply for an exempt agricultural building permit for temporary hoop structures for horticulture and crop protection within the approved cultivation area. Again, this purpose of this addition of wording into the building code is to allow for an exempt permit. So this exempt permit would not go through, would not be in land that has not been previously reviewed for environmental impacts. It would be limited to the area that's already been approved for the permitted activity, the permitted cannabis activity. Other items of interest, a demolition permit will be, or application will be required at the time that the application for the exempt agricultural structure permit is submitted. This is to ensure removal of the temporary hoop structures within the allowed time frame, which is a maximum of 180 days. There was an inadvertent error in the staff report. While I was working on doing all of these amendments, gathering the data, working with county council and the building and the fire representatives, pieces and parts were going in and out of the ordinance and the staff report, and I did not see that there is a mention of including adoption of Appendix C from the California Building Code, Title 24, Part 2. We mentioned that that would be included in this ordinance. However, to include that adoption into this draft ordinance would then prompt next week being another first reading. It would be considered a substantive alteration of the ordinance. And so staff is currently working on an ordinance to adopt Appendix C along with Appendix J, which for a totally unrelated reason, we also should adopt. And so that will be coming to you for your approval in the future, at a future meeting. That concludes my presentation, but both Bill and I welcome any questions you may have. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Questions? Supervisor Spatier?
I appreciate the discussion. I appreciate trying to find ways to make this happen. I feel like we're overcomplicating the situation, and now receiving this, that every row is 4290 compliant. I don't want to say it scares me, but the driveway to the facility, 100%, like that needs to be 4290 compliant once you have buildings or other things that trigger that. But to have 42 compliant roads between rows, I don't know that that is something that our ag has been doing, nor do I know if that's something that they're, I'm not going to say able to do, but that it would be a simple thing to meet. So that part worries me. I know last week we had Rebecca Harper from the Farm Bureau, and I'm not going to put words in her mouth, but I do remember her saying these regulations would not work for traditional ag, and that this was for cannabis, and now we're back to all, which that's my preference, is that we look at it as a structure, not what's inside the structure, because whether you have bunk beds or a normal bed, if you build a house, the house is still the code of the house, and that's it. What's inside of it, it doesn't really matter. That's a different thing. We've done the land use of where it can be done and how it can be done. So I appreciate that we're looking at both, but these guidelines are not going to, in my opinion, work necessarily for traditional ag. And I don't believe that their voice has necessarily been heard as far as the conversation that came from the task force, as this was kind of more intended with the belief that this would be for cannabis. What confuses me is, I guess, at what point is a structure? And I know you and I had this conversation. If it's a 3-foot-high hoop house because all you're doing is growing strawberries, what is the danger potential? What is the issue of just allowing certain things to occur? Once it becomes something that you can walk under, then maybe that's where we look at some of these guidelines. But it starts with anything an inch above the ground to 10 feet above the ground, or 12-foot maximum. And I just feel like it should start with, once you reach a certain height, maybe a certain width, and both, that at this point, it would make sense to have simple regulations. And the surety bonds, we already have the surety bonds from the state. And if we're gonna combine this with ag, I would say we do already have the reason we had the surety bond for the hemp was in case you go above 0.3 THC, where by law we had to go in and destroy it because we needed law enforcement to be involved in the destruction. And so because of that guideline, we wanted to make sure that we had the funds available. To put that on ag or cannabis, when cannabis is already doing the state surety bond, we have code enforcement that can say, hey, this is a nuisance. You didn't take care of your hoop house. It looks bad. Please clean it up, or else we go through the normal code enforcement. I think we have something available to us in case that is the case. I'd like to know how we can move forward. Obviously, we're going to hear from the public. How do we move forward to allow something to occur and at the same time kick it back and say, can we please make sure we get both voices simultaneously on what would be appropriate measures to take versus I don't think what's in front of me works. I'll leave it at that for now.
So looking at this, looks like it's going to complicate the taxable canopy area. So you're going to have, I mean, unless each row is going to be a taxable canopy spot. So I'm confused about that part. We don't have roads like this in the middle of vineyards where somebody collapsed in the middle of a vineyard, they would need assistance by a vehicle. So I'm concerned about this part also.
Can I speak for a minute?
Yes.
Yeah, so part of my concerns, they differ from a vineyard to a hoop house row, especially if they're 12 foot tall and you have 100 foot by 20 foot hoop house is 12 foot tall is, you know, and I didn't make this, just, you know, and I didn't write the 4290 compliance on there, but the fire code does say that it has to be an approved fire access road 150 feet to any place on the structure, which I do agree with. And I prefer the 10 feet, you know, and the whole intent of this was to give them something that would save them time and money, and they could go out and take this and start up their cannabis operation. It's not the only way they could go, and if they want to exceed this, we have no problem with them submitting a building plan, and we could do a deep dive in the code search for it. the issue that I have with this, is if you don't have these roads, say you have a stack and there's none of these roads in here and it's full of hoop houses. They call in and they say, hey, a guy's down in hoop house number 65, and it's in the middle here. So we come in here, fire gets here. For one, they only carry 200, they only have 200 foot of hose on their rig is what they told me. So they got to be able to get their hose to it any place on there. But the other thing is, you come in here, I start off here, and so do I have a plaque that tells me which one is which hoop house, and if I'm fire trying to get in there, and these things are 12 foot tall, so basically it's almost like you're in a corn maze. It's above your head. I can't see across between the vines and see that there's a group of people over there. Oh, I need to go over there. That's where the emergency is. There's all these hoop houses that are just rows of plastic and that are full with the green stuff inside, so you can't see through those and where these people are at and where, oh, there's a group of people over there. That must be where the guy's having a heart attack. So it's a little bit different than the vineyard, in my opinion.
What if they're not 12 feet tall? What if they're just 4 feet tall or 6 feet tall?
Well, the problem
Smaller.
is, as soon as they get above your sight line, now it's the same thing. You can't see across. But, we started out with 10 feet, and they said, well, it didn't give them enough space. So we kind of try to figure out a way that would allow them to have more on there than what they're asking for. But we still need to be able to get fire personnel to them if there's an emergency. And also, it's not just fire, it's health concerns, things like that. I'm not sure what the fix is. I just can't see that you could put like right now, I had a guy come in over on my way home. I stopped, I tagged him about him moving dirt. He come in, I kind of showed him the little draft that I'd been working on and said, hey, if you go with something like this, we're not going to have an issue. I haven't been back onto his site, but every day when I drive by, I can see he's got a whole bunch of rows of stacks of those things really close together. So and then at his place, he's got this little small road that goes back in there. And, well, I can understand your guys' issue with, well, they don't send 4290 out to a vineyard. A vineyard, you just got a bunch of rows of vines there. It's not the same thing as putting up a structure that's going to protect your plants. Now you got combustible materials there. And it's not only the combustible materials, but it's also the fact that you got this big area that we can't see into where somebody's injured or things like that. And we got to get people in there to save them. And then we also got to get them back out of there. And those seem like the main things for the building department and the intent of the code that we're trying to, I brought some stuff to talk about how I got my code path to where we would let these go without a building permit. And it says it's got to meet the intent of the code. And the intent of the code, in my opinion, is that we got to have safety, egress in, egress out. We got to be able to get people, if there's an emergency, how to get them out of there and into a safe location to medical care, those type of things.
And then what about the issue of the taxable area? Is that something you can speak to?
Sure. Yeah, part of the application will include a detailed site plan. So we'll be able to use that site plan to know how much the area of canopy is proposed. Then once we're in there verifying in our annual compliance, we will have the radar, or no, the laser measurements. So we'll be able to figure it out.
Okay. Supervisor Green?
Yeah, I'm not going to go way down the rabbit hole today. There are clearly ongoing disconnects between our understanding of traditional ag and fire risk and what this might bring. So to rebut plastic film, guess what? Vineyards have tons of drip irrigation also made of plastics. We're not worrying about that. Maybe we should be. And I'm interested in hearing the comments from the public for sure, because our direction last week was very clear. Whether there are reasons to not follow that guidance, but we were supposed to come back with a ordinance specific to cannabis cultivation only. But whether it's cannabis only or all types of agricultural crops, this latest draft for me raises still more questions than it answers. I appreciate the hard work of everyone, Ag Advisory, Cannabis Task Force, CDD. But this issue has been handled dramatically differently, county by county, and I don't think we have even scratched the surface of the state-of-the-art of hoop house regulation in the state, and I don't know that it is a great use of time given the lateness of the season, to attempt to do this as a one-off for hoop houses when there are other temporary structures people are interested in doing. And we have this ongoing directive to the task force to fix our broader ordinance. I do want to raise the idea for those people that do have robust hoop house regulations and robust cannabis regulations. The trend seems to be using a programmatic EIR to really drill down into the weeds, if you will, to adopt solutions that don't just make sense from what a structure is and what a structure isn't, but applies some nuance in the various zoning districts of that county. I think this was a worthy effort. I don't know that we can move this forward with all those questions, because if we are to say that we agree fully with all the application of the 4290s and the concerns raised about height of the structures and plastic films and stuff like that, then I think the broader agricultural community would be right to raise concerns. How is this going to affect agriculture generally, not just cannabis specifically? And I don't want to let cannabis be the guinea pigs for the rest of traditional agriculture if we do decide to limit it to cannabis only, notwithstanding their heartfelt desire to get something in the ground. But just for every rule you come up with, there's 5 different variations on a theme that some grower will come up with. And I've heard about 5 or 20 of them in the last week. So I am interested in hearing from the public. It's no offense to anybody for the hard work given so far, but it's going to be tough to move this for me today. Thank you.
I'm ready to hear from the
Okay.
public.
Are you ready, or do you have anything? Okay, we'll open it up for public comment. So we've got people in the chambers and some hands up in Zoom. We'll start in the chambers. You can come up to the microphone, state your name, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Are you ready for me, Jessica?
I'm ready, go ahead.
Perfect. Rebecca Harper, Lake County Farm Bureau. So I think there's potentially a few issues with this. First and foremost, it was not the intent of the task force to apply these regulations to all of traditional ag. Had it been, and this is where we would be, I think that'd be a different discussion. But it was not clear during any of the ongoing discussion we had regarding this matter that these would be applied to traditional ag. Certainly, we could go back and look at it holistically and find something that works for both industries, but that's not the case in this instance. Additionally, with this lovely little map you have here, I'd like you to envision that instead of cannabis, however many feet tall hoops you have, that these are little rows of strawberries with 2 feet tall hoops on them that are attached by wire or other method into the ground, right? So it would seem extremely ridiculous to me if we had 3 4290 compliant roads going through every single strawberry production facility in Lake County. That seems very drastic and extreme. Also, with the theme that was not the intent of these regulations when we came up with these, standards. So I know I've heard from cannabis folks that they really need something this season if they're going to be able to utilize hoop houses, and I'm very sympathetic to that. But I think that this really needs to go back to the task force to have a better recommendation come forward, simply because it was not the intent of the task force to apply these regulations to all agricultural industries. So it would be complex. I've also heard, one of the questions I have, and maybe Maria can answer with regard to cannabis site plans, would be about site plans that are already submitted, right? So if you have site plans that are already submitted, growers that are wanting to use these for this year that have approved site plans, what I've heard from cannabis growers is that it would drastically, change what their canopy looks like. I also think that it's important to consider that nobody who's growing production agricultural products is placing forests of products where they can't walk through and harvest or perform other production activities, right? So there are rows between strawberries, there are rows between lettuce, because you need farm workers to be able to get in there, to water, to spray, to harvest. And so there is rightful passage through many of these production agricultural facilities, and I'm sure that it's pretty similar for cannabis, right? It simply doesn't make sense to have a forest of cannabis. What's in the middle would not be getting taken care of, and that's applicable to any agricultural product. So I just urge you to consider some of those things and think through this a little bit. I don't really know what the solution is here, but I would like to see it be kicked back to the task force. Ooh, on time.
Perfect, thank you. Okay, anyone else in the chambers?
Good afternoon, board. Gosh, a lot of different directions we go and come, so I appreciate the idea that we're going to start calling.
Give your name, please.
Oh, sorry, Michael Wagner. I appreciate the idea that we're going to start looking at cannabis as ag, and that the rules and things, that all of it kind of goes together, one big cup of tea. At the same time, it's probably not, it's not going to make any kind of sense for anybody who's farming to have giant swaths of land that they can't use. Myself in particular, I do a lot of site plans and a lot of work with my clients about how do they make a functional site. With this particular scenario, if we look at the amount of road space you'll have to have for that 4290, it is going to change your canopy hugely. And that's not just for the grower or the cultivator, that's for the tax aspect of this as well. When you're subtracting out 40 to 50% of their area within that site plan, within that diagram that the state and the county both are using, if you subtract out 50% of that, not only is the grower no longer able to grow or have that canopy, but it also means a huge discount in the amount of taxes that are going to be taken in from that. Without a major change to the site plans, you're going to have a mathematical problem with what's going on, or a change. Maybe it's not a problem, but it's definitely a change. In regards to tubes and plastic or similar plastics, I think that we're kind of back to the same conversation of last week, which is plastic. Unless there's some kind of specialty plastic we don't know about, then we would in turn be creating another nuisance or a problem for the environment and requiring to have plastics. When it comes down to the math, the difference between plastic or PVC versus aluminum, 1-inch aluminum per foot weighs 0.58 pounds. Okay, so for a 12-foot height hoop, which turns into 37.6 total linear feet, that means it weighs 21.89 pounds, that hoop, that single one. PVC in 1.5-inch round, which is what you have to use to have enough structure to it for it to hold, weighs 0.56 pounds. On a 37.68 length, that turns into 21.1 pounds. So you got 21.8 versus 21.1. And all I did was Google that. I didn't find any special thing, okay? The question about the accessibility is just these things are made out of sheet plastic. You could take your fingers and shove them through it.
Thank you.
Can I get a real quick question?
Sure.
Just a real quick question. I've heard multiple speakers say this might complicate the mapping submitted to the state and/or the county. I'm not clear on that because the mapping submitted to the state and the county would show a cultivation area, and it may call out canopy within that area too. If this ordinance were passed and a grower were to take advantage of this, get a temporary hoop house permit, it would reduce their footprint, perhaps by physical necessity, to less than was shown on the site plan. But isn't that already envisioned? The site plan shows your maximum cultivation area, your maximum canopy. The site plan doesn't bind a applicant or a licensee to grow that, right? And if you growed a lesser amount of weed within the same space, would you not still be compliant with that site plan?
Well, yes, you would still be compliant, but the amount of cultivation area would change drastically. So the amount of taxes that are going to be collected would change drastically.
Okay, well, that's a tax compliance issue, not a site plan issue. All right, thank you.
Oh, I think it's revenue is what he's talking about.
Hi, my name is Kristen Callahan. I am an owner-operator of a farm in Middletown, Magic Meadow Farms. We went through the development process and were licensed for mixed light cultivation and outdoor cultivation. So we actually had to adhere to the 4290 road standards to receive our use permit. This, the task force and the building department and the planning department and all of the team that's come together here today is to discuss this growing season and this plan. And I feel that it is really important for the growers to be able to access this growing season for these hoop houses because, yes, it will limit the canopy, but you can always adjust the canopy within the county office with like just a little written form saying that we're not going to use as much canopy, this is what we're going to be using, and it's taxed that way. And for the state guidelines, it's about where the plant's leaves touch. So if the plant doesn't go into the walkway, it wouldn't be considered canopy, right? So we're just looking at where the plants are growing, and we can adjust that within the guidelines that we already have. I think that the focus here today isn't about making cannabis ag. Unfortunately, I can't believe I'm saying this, but I really want that for us. But right now, we have to figure out how we can keep growers growing, bring in the revenue that they need to continue and to recoup from the previous year's loss. This will give the county more access to more healthy businesses here. Being able to have a nicer, higher quality in Lake County is what growers need to be focused on because the market is really challenging. So I feel like if we can focus on the sizing requirements in the task force later on in the ordinance, I think that there are many people working diligently. I know Jennifer Smith and Nora are working in the task force with the building department and the planning department on these finite details. The surety bond is exceptionally overkill, in my opinion, because we have the water board reclamation permit, we have an agreement with the state, we have an agreement with our planners, we have an agreement to ourselves as farmers to be successful. We're not illegal operations, we're here to make our communities better and to provide jobs and opportunities. And I also want to put out there that these hoop houses will provide more jobs to more locals, which we really need more jobs that are local. Going over that hill every day is challenging, so I want to just really support this to be passed today and not change anything else, because the more changes that we make, the more taxing it is for the farmers. And we want our businesses to be successful in Lake County, and we want the economy here to get better. And the way to do that is to stop limiting the farmers the ability to farm, and that's across all ag. But in this case, we're not talking about all ag, we're talking about the cannabis farmers. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, if we don't have any further comments in the chambers, we have hands up in the Zoom room. Our first caller is phone 6205.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you. I want to thank Bill Collins especially for his comments, and really all of the supervisors today for bringing up specific concerns. Again and again, the issue of scale mattering, that here in Lake County we have small mom and pop farms, but we're also going to have some of the biggest farms in the state. And so what Bill Collins spoke to is, can a person, if underneath the structure, see and escape? And I think it's really important, and it isn't clear yet in this discussion today at all, what would work for strawberries and what would work for over 10-foot, 12-foot marijuana plants. I appreciate a lot all the attention put to the needs for safety, and I think that's absolutely true, that we're talking about something for a large grow that would be like a corn maze and wouldn't allow people to easily see their way through and escape. And then I wanted to say that in the recent task force meeting, Andrew Amelon said that he didn't have time to both do his inspections and run the task force meetings. And so I'd like to just bring more attention to that there's more staffing need here. These are very well-intended aspirations, but more staff is needed to actually make this program work. Thank you.
Thank you. Did you have something to add afterwards? Okay. Next is Richard Durham.
Hello, my name is Richard Durham, cannabis cultivator and realtor. I think we're complicating this way too much. A stick of PVC is 20 feet long. If you make a 10-foot wide hoop, it brings the height of the hoop down to below 7 feet. If you add more length to the PVC, it becomes completely unstable. So we're just looking for a simple cover. In my case, I'm a full-time, full-sun, full-term farmer, and I need my seedlings protected in springtime from frost. So the hoop house would be a small hoop house with a bunch of babies in it. If your plan calls for having 30 of these hoop houses, well, I think the county would have to assess that separately. But for the small farmer, there's different reasons why you're using hoop houses. And if you're going to do a light deprivation program, in the end, you're going to have to do a real greenhouse because it's just too labor intensive to be pulling tarps over hoop houses. So you have to address what the hoop houses are going to be used for, and they're probably not going to be used for full-term plants. So I suggest that we go back to the simple idea that we just need a simple structure for maybe 60 days, 90 days, and let it go at that. It's easy to start extrapolating and say somebody's going to have a forest of hoop houses. I can't foresee that. It would be crazy monetarily. And if you got a big storm and they blew all down in one day, you'd be loving life. So with that, I'll let it go. Thank you.
Thank you. And next, we have Sarah Bodner. Sarah, we're not able to hear you. You're breaking up. No.
It's not getting better?
That's better.
Okay, I'll try calling. Oh, okay, great. Thank you. I apologize for the poor cell phone reception. I feel a bit like a broken record today, and you all probably feel a bit like it's Groundhog Day because we have been here many times now having the same conversation. And as you well know, cultivators need hoops this year. Listening to the presentation today, with all due respect for staff and the many hours that have gone into this, I have to ask the question of who is really making policy, because there were a number of things put forward today that were directly different than what the board had directed last week and very different than what the task force deliberated, and the recommendations that went through the task force at the board's direction were heard by the Ag Advisory Committee and then the Planning Commission. And now here in this final hour, we're hearing new things like it can only be PVC, which was not the recommendation of anyone. And last week, the board said ore-like materials should be suitable and explicitly said. And then additionally, the board direction to apply this only to cannabis so that we wouldn't get hung up with any last minute opposition that would prevent us from being able to move forward with our crops this year. So I need to call that out and say that it's disappointing to have those things come up, and this kind of selective concern about safety and fire. And we had this all go through the review of every county department as well as the fire chiefs. And when we talked about this in the task force, the fire chief specifically confirms that the 4290 road standards don't apply inside an agricultural activity or agricultural crop. So inserting that is also kind of going against what we spent many, many months figuring out. So I would recommend that the board stick with its previous direction and use permit has had to go through extensive site mapping, and roads have been created that do not accommodate this 3-foot spacing. So it's
we're losing you. Okay. I think we'll move on to the next caller now. And the next person we have is Lori Pascarella.
Hi, can you hear me clearly?
Yes.
Okay, hi, my name is Lori Pascarella, and I'm a compliance specialist in the cannabis industry. And I'm going to kind of second the stuff that Sarah was saying. It seems like there was a move backwards here with this edit to the draft ordinance. There's a lot of things that were added in that weren't discussed in the last reading that don't match to what was discussed would be changed. Yeah, it's kind of interesting that it's becoming more oppressive versus working to create a solution for your cannabis farmers. So I think that I agree that perhaps going back to the last iteration and moving forward from there is a better move. I think that you strayed too far from the path with this iteration and the changes that you've just made. The idea of just plastic is ludicrous because it's not as sustainable. There is no proof that it is any less dangerous or provides any safer environment than aluminum tubing. They effectively weigh the same. The durability is, there's no durability. The plastics snap in high wind or high UV situations. They don't last more than a year. So it doesn't make sense in terms of sustainability in a farmer who wants a long-term program and investment and improvements to their farming operations. I think that the county needs to look to what the state is doing and try to stay as close as possible to that. They have put a lot of efforts on their side to making sure that they're making a good farming sustainable solution for cannabis farmers who are doing outdoor crops to allow for light deprivation and additional crop cycling so that we can be more competitive in an industry that is highly competitive and hopefully wrestle it back from the black market and bring it into where it's fully dominated by legal operators who have good business operations. The other thing that I want to speak to, every one of us has to put together a safety plan, a fire safety plan, and that includes an emergency response plan and how to best interact with our emergency responders, includes making sure that we have designated people to meet a responder at the gate and guide them to a location. We're not going to let any emergency responder come onto a property and not provide guidance to them. We have no more thing that our top priority is the safety of our workers and creating a sustainable working environment and a sustainable agricultural endeavor for ourselves. So I think, yeah, again, that's kind of what I have to say on that. I appreciate your time very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Jennifer Peskin. Jennifer, you want to unmute?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi there. I'm here today to express my support for updating our local ordinance to match the state regulations, allowing outdoor cannabis cultivators to use hoops. And I also urge the use of ag-exempt structures to dry cannabis. Utilizing hoops without artificial light enables our local farmers to benefit from a cost-effective method that reduces energy consumption and promotes sustainable farming. It's also important to note that ag exempt structures are already in place, making it a sensible approach to use the existing structures for drying. It eliminates the need for new construction and fosters sustainability. On top of that, using ag exempt structures for drying creates a standardized process for all ag products, ultimately benefiting our local economy by encouraging flourishing within the downtrodden cannabis industry. With the key support of stakeholders, this proposal has really outstanding potential to benefit our community, but more importantly, the environment. I think it's important that we align our local ordinance with the state regulations so that we can ensure consistency in our regulatory framework and provide a more environmentally friendly way for our cannabis operators to conduct their business. I urge you guys to take action by passing these amendments today and demonstrate your commitment to supporting a sustainable cannabis industry and fostering economic growth for the community. Thank you guys for listening.
Thank you. Next is phone 1447.
Hello, Chris Jennings. Can you all hear me well?
Yes.
Awesome. So, yes, Chris Jennings. I'm in Lake County. I'm going to say something that's going to sound really extreme, but I'm going to explain myself right afterwards. Anyone since, the end of 2019 that is being denied an agricultural structure for, say, drying their cannabis for their outdoor farm is being wrongfully, based on 4290 standards, is being wrongfully denied a permit. I would say anyone who is potentially
so today we're talking about the hoop houses.
I'm getting there, I know, yep, for sure. Okay. Sorry. Anyone at the same with hoop houses and greenhouses, I would be willing to pull the code for the farm people, traditional farm, and say, hey, what are you allowed to do hoop houses on your farm? And they're allowed to. What we're doing is we're separating cannabis and traditional ag again. And at the end of 2019, the supervisors, including Rob Brown out of all supervisors, agreed that outdoor cannabis was deemed 4290 exempt and has the same entitlements as the agricultural community as a whole. So if you need a building or a hoop house or any of those things, you're allowed that. So I just don't understand why we're necessarily reverting back from that resolution. I believe Bruno Sabatier was part of that. That's when we lost Jeff Smith, not lost, but he moved on. Rob Brown, it was at the end of 2019. I have the resolution pulled up. I just need to find the signed official copy. So there's plenty of people out there that are, getting 4290 exemptions for their structures, greenhouses specifically, at the end of Jerusalem grade. I know a person back there that got signed off on hoop houses, greenhouses, and their road, Jerusalem grade, was deemed 4290 exempt, and we don't have to follow those standards. So I just think, I think there's a bigger issue at hand, and I think we have a lot of newer people trying to advise policy on behalf of the cannabis people who are not aware of what happened in 2019 when some 4290 updates happen, because it seems every time I get a phone call from a friend or another person in the community saying, I got denied this because of 4290. It's like, they approved 4290 standards in 2019. Like, it's there. So I thank you, Bruno. Thanks for Mike Green, everyone, just realizing that this potential update is kind of has gotten out of control, and there's just a lot more to it. I really encourage everyone to go back and review that 4290 exemption ordinance for outdoor people, because my understanding is anyone who is an outdoor garden who wants to get something that the ag community wants to do, you are 4290.
Your time is up. Thank you.
Thank you.
It looks like maybe your hand is still up, and also your hand, Bart, is still up. Okay, so I will do one last call for public input. Jennifer Smith.
Good morning, board. This is Jennifer Smith. I don't even know where to begin. Again, I think somehow we've gone backwards from where we were with the recommendations from the task force. Ultimately, we're an ag product. There's already hoop structures allowed for ag products in the county. I think we're just adding restrictions and additional code that doesn't need to be. I think if we just allow that cannabis be allowed, to use what's on the books, let's just go with that direction. We're letting policy dictate how we actually farm, and there's no other crop out there that is, under such regulation and is having their methodology dictated by policy. There's T-posts in every vineyard. There's, fire trucks, if they were going to drive to the middle of a vineyard, would have to drive through T-posts. We're not really talking about structures when we're talking about hoops. We're talking about row coverage. These aren't buildings. The risk of, sorry, I'm not making any sense because I'm just flustered by this. Let's just, stick with the fact that we're an ag product. Let's use the hoops that are already permissible in this county for other ag products and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Patricia Lanier.
Hi there, Patricia Lanier with Noble Gardens. I'm having such a hard time. I think just like Jen Smith, just like everyone else, where, the state of California, I believe, issued a letter to the Board of Supervisors several seasons ago saying that cannabis is to be treated as an agriculture-like product. We are only being considered not ag because of federal regulations, which are outdated and quickly dying off. That is the only reason that we are not agriculture in the state of California or any other state that is legal as far as medical or adult use cannabis is concerned. It is federal regulations that is continuing to perpetuate the idea that cannabis is anything other than ag. If any of us were growing any other product besides this plant, this conversation wouldn't be taking up time in government office right now. And I just want to call attention to that. We're being discriminated against. We're taxed at higher rates. We are constantly having to battle all of these policies that make literally no sense. And in the meantime, what's happening is patients are suffering. And that's the thing that seems to continually get lost in this conversation, is that we're not just growing strawberries. We're not just growing wine. We are growing medicine that helps people who suffer on pharmaceutical drugs, like myself, like other people. First and foremost, this plant is medicine, and it's being prevented from getting to market effectively because of some stigmatized policies that are rooted in racism.
Can you keep your comments to the hoop house item, please? Thank you.
Right. The hoop house item is that, and how this is relevant to the hoop house item is that if we were growing anything else, we wouldn't be having this conversation as to whether or not we'd be able to put umbrellas over our plants. So please, please, let us have this one little olive branch and move forward. We're begging you at this point. We just want to operate. Thank you.
Okay. Betsy Kahn?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Board. I would just like to comment, and I'm not going to get into the specifics of any of this detailed stuff. The reason for carefully structuring the uses of cannabis operations and the way they go about it is because of the additional risks that are involved, the crime levels. People don't go in and steal strawberries. They don't go in and steal wine grapes. There's no alcohol involved, but cannabis is subject to theft and other kinds of hazards. And I would urge the board to apply the precautionary principle in crafting the management of this as we develop all these so-called sustainable operations, not fly-by-night, overnight, quick deals. Let's see who's really investing in making good watershed and environmental decisions. And thank you for the consideration of these thoughts.
Thank you. Okay. We are through our public comment. And we'll bring it back to the board. Supervisor Spatier.
So I'm going to reiterate, we're looking at a structure policy here, not a land use policy, and I think that a structure is a structure is a structure, and whatever works for the structure, what happens inside the structure, that's part of the land use. So I think that we need to find something that makes sense. I am going to use what someone else has already kind of stated because it's my belief as well. We have an equity program that's part of cannabis. Why does that exist? Because of the history behind cannabis. If we continue to separate what one structure can do versus another structure, we are continuing that inequity that history has created for us to deal with. So land use, we can make differences. Structure is a structure. What's in front of us does not function for everybody who would like to use these structures. However, there are some requests to move forward. And I would like to get consensus, doesn't have to happen right now, that we do kick this back so that agriculture and cannabis can come together and say, these are regulations that work for all of us, and there can be tiers of different heights, require different square footage, require different type of regulations. Once you reach a certain height, you intensify the regulations. I don't know. That's not for me to create. I'm not the farmer of every single product, but I just don't think, I don't think that splitting structures into, you grow carrots, here's your regulations. You grow strawberries, here's your regulations. You grow cannabis, here's your regulations. We're going to be at this for years to come. So I'd like to offer a suggestion. It sounded to me like, and again, this is if the consensus is yes to go and bring it back to the task force to continue discussion on something that works for everybody, because that's the way, in my heart, I believe it should be. I agree that there are structures as we speak. There is confusion about structures that have been approved and yet we don't have code for it. I know in Clear Lake Oaks there was hoop houses. There was a lot of complaints about that. That was actually based on our recommendation from a prior director during early activation that they had to put their stuff in hoops, yet no regulations for hoops. We did the farmland protection zone where we required those transitioning from outdoor to more mixed light and indoor to be in hoops. No hoop requirements, no hoop ordinances to say exactly what that looks like, or permits. I don't know how many people actually took advantage or are doing that, but we created those rules to force people to be with hoops. We have hoop houses. If you travel enough around, you can see that they are an agricultural land. I don't want to create a problem for those that have already created things, and I think that's where that conversation needs to happen of what exists, what are the regulations that match what already exists so that that can come back to us. However, if that's going to happen, I'm willing to move forward currently with something for cannabis. I would say the majority of 1 through 14 can stay exactly the same. I agree with those except for 2. 1, PVC or similarly weighted tubing. That way they can use whatever new material happens to come out tomorrow, as long as it's similarly weighted so that it's not 100 pounds, but it's around the 20 pounds or whatever it is that it might be. And 6, I don't know why there needs to be a 3. So between the length, you have 100 feet. I believe 100 feet was the maximum. So you have 100 feet. Yes, I get that. 3-foot section, another 100 feet. But between that, you have 75 feet between each exit that you can access. Why do you have to have a 3-foot between the next one? Because if you're all alone, no matter if you have 3 foot or not, good luck finding somebody if you're all alone. And if you're in a group, you're going to have somebody waving down where they should come to go help somebody. So I don't think the 3-foot section along the lengths matter, as long as there's a 3-foot section between the width so that you have 100 foot, 3 feet, 100 foot, 3 feet, and then they can be side by side going down, because you still meet the regulation of 75 feet to an exit. Those are the only 2 things that I would say we could look at changing that simplifies some things, but I would really like to see something where this is an ag structure, and as soon as we start nitpicking, we are creating inequities. Just like for you, here's your code for your house, and for you, we're going to choose a different code for your house, even though the house is exactly the same. We can't decide how to build code for a structure by looking at what's going inside. That is the choice of the farmer of what goes inside. The land use is the important part for where and when and how. So that would be my offer on how to move forward in order to do something, but it needs to go back to the task force to get something that works for everyone.
So my issue here is that when you brought this to us, was it last fall or late summer? When was it? September, October?
Probably.
Okay. But we have to be consistent in our ask. We did not ask the task force to come up with something that's universal for all traditional.
If you read my intent, it was for all.
Okay, but it was coupled with the drying shed. So this is.
Which was for all.
Okay, but this is what they've been working on, and I think the intent was always for cannabis, though.
Never was for cannabis. That's why I asked for the Ag Advisory Board to review it and for the Cannabis Task Force to review it, because all of the above needed to review it. The idea was a simple, all surrounding regulation that worked for everybody. I spoke with different groups to gather all the information, then said this is not the final product, but here's a place to start. Or else let's start over. But the idea was to let them hash out the details. I just got some information from the different groups and put it together, but it was always about both.
Okay, that's not how I recall, but you were the one that wrote it. So anyway, we've gone this far. We've had over 6 months of work with all of these different groups, and I think we need to figure out how to move forward. And I do agree that, with the difference between PVC and aluminum, I don't see much of a difference there. Again, we can still improve it, but if we don't do something now, then this is done for the season, and no one will be able to utilize this. So I want to figure out how to move forward today, and we can continue the discussions and figure out how it works for traditional ag and cannabis together. But, I want to make sure that this has been a productive 6 months, that we don't lose the morale of all of the people that have been helping and all the stakeholders and everyone who's had a hand in this. I don't think that the 4290 roads throughout through the hoops are necessary. I think the 3-foot in between the rows is fine. I'm okay with those recommendations that you made, but I do think that we need to move forward. And I'm looking for other comments.
I completely agree. If we could find a solution to move forward, we have been talking this over obviously for years, and it's never a challenge. With this whole industry, there's nothing, one thing isn't going to fix everything. We do this, there's going to be something else that comes up. But, obviously Lloyd I really be looking to you for a path forward. My thought is, at least for my feelings, and I think I don't want to see this being put on the agricultural community at this point, but being able to help out cannabis for this growth season as we move through the process. So if you've heard all the discussion, if there's maybe a suggestion or something like that, that we can move something forward. Sounds like the cannabis industry obviously really wants to see something happen, and I'd like to see if we can get that done. I'd like to not push it off either. Continue all the other conversations, but man, see if we get something done.
Yes, so what's before the board is the first reading of the ordinance. So in the first reading, 2 motions, strictly procedure. And if there are any amendments made to the ordinance proposed, it could move forward with the first reading as amended under those two motions. So it looks like from where the board is right now, the Section 2A1 and 2A6 have been specifically identified as possible provisions for an amendment. And then there's also, for purposes of the first reading, for purposes of the first reading of this ordinance as amended. And you also have that issue of whether or not there should be specific reference made to narrowing the scope of this ordinance to apply to, say, only cannabis, or as it stands right now, based on community development's presentation and the draft of the ordinance itself, it is broader than just cannabis as it's currently drafted.
Supervisor Green?
Yeah, thank you everyone for the comments. Interested in moving forward if we do it right, and I'm not convinced we can do it right today, and I'm not convinced we can do it right if we kick it back to Cannabis Task Force for a cannabis-only iteration of this. Again, we have not taken the big picture. What other counties in the state are doing? I did email Director Turner some regulations from Santa Barbara County. It bears note that those regulations took shape, informed both by a lawsuit and by a programmatic EIR that followed that lawsuit. These are complicated issues, and it is not as simple as some people might say, hey, we're just throwing poles in the ground and hoops up. Again, are we talking about a 3-foot for strawberries? Are we talking about 20-foot high? The state regulations, for all the people that want to mirror that, you can grow mixed light cultivation in a hoop house if you run power in it. This current ordinance doesn't allow for hoop house cultivation that would be eligible for mixed light licensing under the state. So I'm really torn. If I were to move it all and support this moving forward, it would be with the draft before us today. That does apply to ag generally. I know that is not what was advertised. However, all the comments we've heard saying we absolutely need hoop houses has come from cannabis. I'm not expecting a big rush from vineyards and pear growers to pop this up. So it's kind of like no harm, no foul. And experience is the best teacher. Having an ordinance on the books that can be applied and that we can learn from and we can come back and amend as needed, there may be some value in that. But what I really want to do is not kick it back to the task force. What I really want to do is just flush this for the year. The task force already has a substantial amount of homework revising the entire cultivation ordinance. The hoop houses could be addressed in that master ordinance. And we do talk about getting granular and changing standards by zoning district, minimum parcel size. If I do read the ag exempt structure thing right, there's a 10-acre minimum. That's not addressed here at all. I think we have a lot to talk about at the ordinance level, and hoop house is just the teeniest little fraction of that master ordinance, and all the things we require: property management plans, fire safety plans, all that good stuff. So I don't, I understand what the industry wants. I don't know that I'm convinced that the industry needs it, especially in terms of frost protection this late in the spring. When we take a look at traditional ag and all the questions that have been raised about their frost protection practices and groundwater pumping, some hard questions. And the cannabis industry probably could benefit from asking some hard questions of themselves too. It has traditionally, from its less than legal underpinnings, been resource intensive. When we have hoop houses and all that up on the North Coast, it's because land, cannabis cultivation isn't allowed in prime farmland where it's warmer. Importation of non-native soil, stuff like that. So totally support the idea that there's environmental benefits that comes with putting plants under covers, but a permanent mixed light structure greenhouse is one thing. Popping up hoop houses for every licensed grow, and then every unlicensed grow in the county starts popping up hoop houses to keep up with the Joneses, could potentially create enforcement issues. I'm open to listening ideas that we kick it to the task force and bring it cannabis only, but I just don't think that is getting us where we need to go. If we're going to take a meaningful look at regulating cannabis as we do agriculture generally, this draft ordinance doesn't get it there. I don't know that task force can fix it on the cheap, on the fly. And I would much rather us dive into the bigger issues, if only because whether it's hoop houses, temporary drying sheds, storage containers, and whatever else we're going to put in that revised ordinance, we're going to be revisiting the potential impacts on the environment. And although our original regulatory ordinance was exempt from secret review under the regulations available at the state at the time, if we were to take a fresh run at our cannabis ordinance and what we want in it this time around, I'm not so sure that we should not be looking at it for some level of environmental review of that ordinance. So somewhere between an initial study and a programmatic EIR would be the best place to be talking about all of our cannabis cultivation issues. If we're going to be talking about hoop houses, it might be the best place to talk about hoop houses as it pertains to all agricultural practices. But just slicing and dicing it down to the narrow issue of hoop houses for cannabis this year, no, I'm not convinced.
Supervisor Spatier.
I don't think that's fair to do that to ag when their voice was not voiced for what's in front of us today. I think that they need to have a fair shake at putting their voice into it, and so to automatically subject them to something they haven't really been, or this room would be full. It would not just be Ms. Harper sitting in front. And so I don't want to do that. I don't want to put people on their heels. I don't think that's fair. I do want to, if you don't mind, Director Turner, Sonoma County Code, Chapter 7, Section 7-13, C2. Just might be a place to look at to see where we go. It's all about hoop houses, prefabricated structures, no more than 500 square feet in area, constructed of light frame materials and covered with cloth or flexible plastic, which has a thickness no greater than 5/1000ths of an inch, accessory to a single-family dwelling with no associated electrical, plumbing, or mechanical equipment, and the height above grade does not exceed 12 feet. This building permit exemption shall not apply for site-built framework or any method of construction. It's talking about an exempt a building exemption permit type of thing. And I just think that might help us to see. I know you've looked at others, but I just want to make sure that we're not trying to reinvent the wheel as well. I think that I think it's so much more complicated than what we need, but unfortunately, and I will throw my other comment as well for cannabis. I remember when we did the farmland protection zone, people yelling about being forced to go in a greenhouse, in a hoop house, and now it's like begging for a hoop house. The industry is changing so fast. We can't change as fast as the industry is asking. So that part can get a little frustrating that we are back at similar conversations we've had in the past, but with a different reaction from the same industry we're dealing with. I would like to again offer that I'm willing to move forward as long as the conversation continues to look at how we can implement a structure-wide ordinance, again with item 1, PVC or similarly weighted tubing. That way it allows different types of material. And item 6, where the 3 feet is between the width of the structures, not between the length of the structure, to give our farmers more flexibility, and that still meets the 75-foot maximum distance between every exit. And I think that's the easiest way to solve some of the issues that we've been told from cannabis. It solves the issue of ag being put in a place that they never asked to be or didn't have a voice at the table to say what they would like to see, as they believe this was intended for cannabis. But we need to have a structure ordinance in the long run, not a cannabis structure for hoop houses ordinance, while we still don't have anything that specifically states what ag hoop house structures should look like or do look like, as I don't think the right to farm just means you can build a building, just like that's why we have an ag exempt structure, but it does mean that it reduces the inspections and the criterias of what needs to be met in order to have those implements added to the farmland. And I want to make sure that we're not doing it in an overburdensome fashion.
I agree with those changes. We have not heard from Supervisor Crandall.
I think for me, I mean, I've seen a lot of the different verbiage changes in regard to the ordinance, and I know some of them came from constituents in my district, and I know it's not in tune with what was worked on throughout the ad hoc committee, of course. But I think the bottom line for me is I know that there's more asks, of course, with what I just mentioned. However, the bottom line is this. The industry needs to do something to be able to grow this year. B, we have programs that depend on the cannabis taxes. So, I mean, we have to give them an opportunity to move forward somehow. And I feel like if we don't move forward and we kick it back or whatever the case may be, and hinder other groups like ag, that it's not fair to them either. But I think if we can accommodate for what Supervisor Sabatier said, with specifics being considered later, I think we get to that point. And I just know the bottom line is this. They need to be able to grow this year, and they need that opportunity to see if this moves forward with the taxes next year. You know, we've already pushed them back once or twice because of the industry's hurting in that capacity. And I don't see limiting it even more to basically just kind of funnel them to a position where they're just going to not be successful. I don't know if that makes sense, but bottom line for me is we've got a lot of comments from people that wanted to see more into this ordinance. I think they were heard, but I think there needs to be a well-balanced path forward, and I'm willing to do that as well.
Okay, is there going to be action?
If I could just clarify to make sure I understand. First of all, I serve at the pleasure of the board. You guys want me to toss this out and start over? We toss it out and start it over. But I'm very glad that everybody's motivated to move forward, because it has been definitely an effort from all members of the Cannabis Task Force, the Ag Advisory Board, the Planning Commission, and now multiple hearings before you. So if I understand correctly, the board is amenable to the ordinance as presented today with 2 further amendments. One is 3 feet between rows, that is alongside and at either end. And then secondly, PVC material or a material of similar weight. Are there any other changes that I might have missed? 3, I don't know.
What?
So there was just the 2 changes, the weights and the width, the 3 feet between the width of the structure.
3 feet between, so that's all along the structure,
No,
correct?
just in the length part, if we can bring them together. As long as you have this 3-foot section and 3-foot section, then you
Oh,
have.
so they can actually be attached or be standing right next to each other? So
That's
0 between them, 3 feet along the rows that go on either end?
in between the 100 feet.
Yeah, yeah.
That way, there's still access, and there's still the 3 feet.
Got it.
So how would you get a fire apparatus within 150 feet per fire code? Of every portion of the structure. Sorry. How are we going to comply with the fire code that requires 150 feet from a fire access road to any exterior portion of the structure?
Then you use something like what the code for Sonoma County that says that there's no need for separation in between, and I forget where I was reading this, but that what did they call it? The groups of hoop houses can't exceed a certain square footage. That way, automatically, you know that if you have 3 and that's it, that 20 times 3 is 60 feet, you can reach. 20 times 4 is 80 feet, you can reach.
Yeah, you know, and as you mentioned there at 500, we're at 2,000, so
No,
we're
we're-
already at 4 times the size. So we're already at 4 of theirs in a block for one of the, because we're at 20 by 100, 2,000 square feet. So we're already at 4 of their 500 or 600 square feet hoop houses you had mentioned into one, because that was allowing them a more propagation room without having the setbacks.
So here it says, separation distance between temporary membrane structures is not required where the aggregate floor area does not exceed 15,000 square feet and the structures are not used for cooking, so on and so forth. So that's why I think we should be looking at things like that to help us.
And I think 15,000 square feet, I don't think you would be within 150 foot of the inside of that structure.
The problem is,
I just don't know.
Until about a week ago.
Just waive fire code.
Up until about a week ago, anyone outside of the world of cannabis would have been able to put up a hoop house, and I don't know that anyone has ever gotten a violation for a hoop house. So somehow or another, that was allowed, or maybe it was never allowed and we just didn't know and we didn't do anything. I don't know. But until about a week ago, it was never an issue until we started speaking about this. And again, the safety for somebody growing a cannabis plant under a hoop house versus the safety of somebody growing a carrot in a hoop house, I see no difference. It's a hoop house. And for some reason, we've been here since who knows when with hoop houses, and that's never been a subject to breach. And again, I don't want to create anything for ag without them voicing their opinions on how it would impact their world, but it just, we are complicating something when less than a week ago, it was not complicated at all.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
if I may assist with, at least with the difference between what's
Yes.
presented here today and the
Please.
Sonoma Code. The Sonoma Code is based on a different building code section that addresses temporary membrane structures, and that's what their permit permits. And the building code section that relates to the temporary membrane structures has a different criteria than the code section that is relied on for the ordinance presented to you today. And the ordinance presented to you today relates on an exemption from the building code section under Title 24, Part 2, Section 105.2, parenthetical 10. There's a list of exemptions there. The 10th one in that list is the exemption that's relied on for today's ordinance. And so the criteria that have been attached to that are based on that code section and not the membrane code section.
Thank you.
And just if I may add, so procedurally, if this ordinance passes, that doesn't necessarily negate any possible incorporation of those Sonoma code sections if it complements the ordinance that's being presented before the board today, if it passes, or passes first reading at least. So Ms. Johnson mentioned, the temporary membrane structures that the Sonoma Code is relying on, there may be a way to somehow incorporate some of those sections in a way that would complement the provisions that's currently before the board by way of this ordinance, proposed ordinance.
Were you looking also through 11 through 14? You said that can be, that those additions would be not implemented in this, or your recommendation was that?
No, 11 through 14, I'm fine with, the only two out of the whole thing that I wanted to change was 1 and 6.
Okay.
Everything else, I don't disagree with those things currently as applied to cannabis.
All right.
Supervisor Green.
I believe staff will need clarification. Again, when they bring it back, it's going to be limited to commercial cannabis? Or are we kicking it back task force with direction? We're going to continue to plow down the road that applies to ag generally. So that's an important point.
As I stated, if it goes back to eventually have a structure policy that covers anybody that uses that structure, I'm fine with continuing forward with a kind of a split so that we can at least move forward. If there's no intention to go back and do a structure for whoever uses that structure, then I feel we are continuing the systemic issue that we have continuously dealt with for the last 4 years.
Okay. So do we have consensus for staff to continue to work on this in parallel? We pass this today.
My answer to
Yes?
that would be yes.
Yes?
I don't understand the parallel instruction. Are we kicking it back to Cannabis Task Force to fix this with cannabis-specific language?
No. We're going to pass this today, but we're also going to keep working on it.
I want to say this is the specific cannabis language.
As presented today, that applies to ag generally.
Yeah, that was my comments earlier, that it's the only way to move forward without it affecting ag would be to change our current document that's been presented to us today, correct?
To say that it's for cannabis only?
Yes.
Again,
That's hence kicking it back to also say, while we approve this, continue the conversation where eventually there is a hoop house ordinance without the specific of what it is that you're growing in the hoop house.
Additionally, this is an option to be exempt from a building permit. All structures over 120 square feet require a building permit. That includes hoop houses. There is a misconception out there that, thank you, Supervisor Sabatier brought to my attention yesterday, that hoop houses do not require building permits. That is an error. There was an in-house draft of a memo that was mistakenly released to the public as though it had already gone into effect. That was not accurate. All structures over 120 square feet require a building permit. So what you are considering today is allowing an option for an agricultural activity of a temporary hoop structure to be exempt from a building permit requirement should it satisfy the design and development standards that are in the ordinance. So all other structures that may not meet this would then be required to, or would have the opportunity to then go ahead and get a building permit. Hope that helps. We're not putting regulations on agriculture in general. We're offering a way for the already existing regulations to be exempted under these certain design and development standards for those who would like to apply. But they don't have to. They could still go through the building permit process.
What?
You got 5 minutes
I have 5 minutes?
for a break.
Oh, you want to take a break?
Yeah, my iced tea is.
Okay. We're going to take a 5-minute break. Come back at 3:16. Welcome back. We were in the midst of deliberation here. Who wants to go? Supervisor Spatier.
This is messy, and because it's messy, and I don't even know how to express my thoughts right now, other than I just don't see any other way than to ask to please come back with something that we're all kind of all over the place, and I feel like we're pushing something forward that is not going to work. My thoughts are we can't make some of the changes we're trying to make. I mean, we have the building officials saying, how are we going to do this? And I just think that fixing it on the fly today here on this dais is probably not the best way for us to get to the right answer. I know there's some that really want something today, but I'm starting to lean into the idea of let's, you know, what's been said, coming back. I don't know.
Yeah, but what we asked for last week was for the surety bond language to be put in.
Yeah.
Wasn't that big of a change.
If the board would like to direct staff to return, that would be fine. I just would request clarity on what would be better. What sort of amendments or areas shall we look for bringing it back to you? So far, I've got the 3-foot rows and PVC or material of similar weight.
And cannabis specific.
And cannabis specific.
And we can't make those 3 changes today?
Those would all be changes on the surface of the ordinance. I'm under the understanding that that would still count, that we could do a first reading today as amended.
A quick question, if that was the direction. If it was cannabis specific, and this maybe for county council as well, would we be looking to add 6.25 to chapter 5, or would we be looking to add those same things probably to article 27 as a performance standard?
Since this is an option for an exempt building permit for agriculture, I would recommend keeping it in 6.25. I originally took a look at putting it in Article 27 under a zoning permit, which is ministerial, but would allow planning to review all the criteria. But I think that that would be more cumbersome. This seems simpler since it lists all the criteria right there. And so they would just be applying for an ag exempt building permit specific to hoop houses. I think this would be the more streamlined way to go. Additionally, making the ordinance specific to cannabis is consistent with the spirit in which the process has gone through, both at the task force, the Ag Advisory Board, and the Planning Commission. And that is because when we were dealing with this entire conversation or the entire resolution of intent, it was just assumed in our discussion that this was to help the cannabis industry. And so all of our conversations have taken place in the context of assisting the legal permitted cannabis industry.
Yes, I agree with that. Well, I'm okay making those 3 changes. If anyone else is?
I agree.
You want to? Yes.
Question.
Require a motion to do it?
A question for the building official, Mr. Collins. You mentioned a fire code, and so can you provide an idea of how many of these hoop houses should be in a group, so that maybe we can add that in there so that it's not 50 hoop houses connected together if we are changing the 3-foot for between the length? If it's 2,000 and there's 6 of them, is that a maximum?
You give me just a second, draw a little picture here, and I'll do my best.
I'm just trying to help comply with what you're bringing up, because I don't want to ignore those things either. I don't want to create something that puts us in a position where we're kind of contradicting maybe state code, as you mentioned, is where I'm thinking the fire code that you spoke of. And I think that if that's possible for us to get a better number so that we can at least meet that, I think that would be an appropriate thing to.
Yeah, and the confusing part is going to be if they change, I can figure it up what it's going to be for the maximum size, 100 by 200, 2,000 square foot structure. But if they shrink it down, now it's, now they might be able to get more in there because obviously they're not going to have the same size box.
New paper, new math.
Just give me a couple minutes, I'll do my best here real quick.
And Madam Chair,
Yes.
if I may, if the board is considering, proceeding with the first reading of this as amended, I do note that Community Development had a couple of amendments
Yes.
to that ordinance and wanted and perhaps some clarification while we're waiting.
Yes, your small amendments that you spoke of in the very beginning? Yes.
Let me look through my extremely well-organized pile, and I'll get right to that. All right. Other items of interest. The demolition permit is required at the same time as the exempt agricultural structure permit. That's to ensure removal of the structures within 180 days. Staff report Appendix C, that was an error. We're working on it.
But what's the difference between what's on B?
What's on B?
Because it says concurrently with the exempt ag building permit application, the applicant shall submit a demolition permit application for removal of the temp house structure no later than 180 days. Is that?
I just wanted to point that out to you.
Okay, so it's not a change
As it
to the
reads,
document.
Correct, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Then okay, so that one is, we've already talked about regarding the fire roads. Then the other one is recommended amendment at 6.25.1.c. This is specifying that this permit for the hoop houses would be appropriate within an already approved cultivation area. Again, that's not canopy area, but it's the larger vetted cultivation area. I think that's about it. There was additional just housekeeping or cleanup wording to clarify some of the CEQA exemptions. It's under a Class 4, and so, but that isn't really anything you've been discussing. And the surety bonds.
And just real quickly on that, so the title, when it comes back off the change, and then there are multiple references using temporary hoop structures, and that may be, in this iteration, it's horticulture, but it's going to go back to what it was last week, cannabis cultivation. So just pointing out the title and then all subsequent references where currently it says today horticulture and crop protection will be cannabis cultivation, just so we don't miss any of those next week.
Indeed.
And then while Mr. Collins is continuing to do his part, just want to check in just because we've opened a can of worms. I want to make sure that our traditional ag is not on a radar or on a target with the conversation saying if anything's over 120 square feet, you need a permit, and if we don't pass this, then you're going to have to get a building permit. I just want to make sure that they remain in the gray area until we can come back and say this is what we're looking at, because I don't want to, again, put them on their heels or surprise them and create burdens at this moment in time.
There should not be any surprise that the California Building Code requires a building permit for anything over 120 square feet for any use. That's not gray. As we receive reports for hoop houses that go up around the county, we do refer those complaints over to code enforcement for proper enforcement, because we have to verify that there was building permits for those structures, just as we would with any structure that we get a complaint on that possibly being built without permits that would require it. And so code enforcement is already moving on a complaint we received recently.
Okay, do you have it?
And I'll give a little quick heads up on that too as well. So even like those membrane covered garage things you buy at Home Depot and stuff, and come home and put it out in the front yard, those require a building permit as well, just so we're clear. It's not just the hoop house structure because it's cannabis. It's any structure that size. It's a membrane covered structure, so it's not exempted from a building permit. So I just want to give a little clarification on that.
Good to know.
So if any of you guys have any of those, make sure you come see me. So I brought up the code section too, just to be clear. I believe that the route is supposed to be in 150 feet anywhere on the exterior of the building. I'll read the code section. 503.1.1 of the California Fire Code. Buildings and facilities. Approved fire apparatus access roads shall be provided for every facility, building, or portion of building hereafter constructed or moved into or within the jurisdiction. The fire apparatus access road shall comply with the requirements of this section and shall extend to within 150 feet of all portions of the facility and all portions of the exterior walls of the first story of the building as measured by an approved route around the exterior of the building or facility. So if, in my opinion, as the building official, if you have a box there and it's got that, if you stack some together, there's no way to get between them. So there's not a, I made a little picture here. This is what I believe you're talking about. I may be correct, Bruno, or Supervisor Sabatier. So there would be no separation here, and you just have that little road there. So obviously, we wouldn't have any access to these exterior walls here, which it talks about 150 feet to all exterior walls measured around the outside. I guess we could possibly look into this one whole thing being a structure. But I would think you would need access through there because, if they come inside with the hose, they would be able to get in there with that as well. I don't know if they would fight it that way. I'm the fire marshal here. I never go out and fight a fire, so I'm not.
Turn it that way so they can see too.
This is what I showed everybody. So this is what I believe Supervisor Sabatier was mentioning in his recommendation was the 100-foot sides would be connected, and there would be a 20-foot, then the path would come down the center here. My concern about that is I don't have 150-foot access to the exterior of this structure.
So I have a question.
Can we go to the mic?
Can I ask one question about
Oh, sorry.
Are we opening up public input again?
I just want to ask a question about the.
Okay, just go to the microphone. Thanks.
Thank you, Bill. My question is, even if those are lumped together, right, since they don't have a complete wall, it's poles in the ground, and then plant matter, wouldn't you, this is not a question for argumentative purposes. It's purely educational.
Trying to think about
wouldn't you still be able to get through, right? Like, there's not walled structures against each other. It's poles in the ground, and then plant matter. The plants aren't going to be planted on one another because they need to receive sunlight and yada, yada, yada. So wouldn't you still be able to get through even if they were up against each other?
I believe it would require an approved fire access like a door. I don't think you could put stuff in front of it like plant matter and things like that. I think
No, I mean like the plant matter that's there because of the
yes, and I believe that would be separating it.
Huh. Okay.
I think you would have to have a full
I'm
size.
just curious about the door if there's no way to.
A full-size man door that would go through there if they were going to be connected and be one structure.
Got it.
You could technically like weasel through.
Yeah,
but
my
we're talking
question was
about
kind
the
of about
doors.
the doors. Yeah, because
fire.
like
Approved
freestanding door
doors.
frame, question mark?
Well, I'm thinking more if it's if you're going to combine them all together. The one thing is now we got to talk about now we have a bigger building. Are we okay with that? I was trying to limit the building size because now the same thing. I'm trying to get fire personnel to you as quickly as possible. The more you're stacking together, the harder it is to get people outside. That is my main hang up with stacking them very close together. Yeah, and that's why we went with the 2,000 square feet. And now so I guess you could go with something like this and you would still have 150 feet here. You could. So I guess you could actually stack a couple more and you could still get 150 feet around the outside. You could get 150 feet here. So it could be, it'd be a 75 and 75. But the issue is, how do I protect these walls here if I'm the fire guy? And now I have this big 5 or 6 or 10,000 square foot building 100 by 100, which would be 5 of those hoop houses in a row, would be 10,000 square feet with a lot of plant matter in the way, and we're trying to find somebody in there that's injured or that we need to get out of there. Well, fire would be.
Question.
The fire chiefs didn't make an appearance today, but I can let you know that I was on the phone with them this morning, and they're not on board with with the lower separation.
Oh, Supervisor Green.
Yeah, just to clarify terms, because I know the interpretation is 120 square foot. All of a sudden, the building permits are flying. But two terms you just used from the fire code section you cited, building and facility, that's not interchangeable with structure, or is it? Because this goes back to our whole history of this. Yes, I suppose in some sense a hoop house is a structure generally speaking, but again, a 3-foot hoop house and a 20-foot hoop house that has lighting attached and fixed frame is a different thing. So when we use these terms interchangeably, structure, building, facility, and we're citing the specific fire codes and then trying to interject whatever wisdom the fire code adds to our understanding of planning codes and other things that may apply to buildings and structures and facilities. Again, I have to be very specific because those terms have to be defined in the building code. If we're not using them precisely, we're probably shooting ourselves in the foot. And to the issue at hand, again, the never-ending debate over 4290 fire standards, a structure and a facility and a building, to my mind, are not analogous terms, even if we bounce them about that way in casual conversation or hearings like this. So I don't need an answer to that, but we're bringing the ordinance back anyway. But as you're slicing and dicing building standards and fire codes, again, I just want to highlight the fact that a low-lying strawberry hoop house and a 20-foot thing with lighting attached, permissible under state law and not permissible under this iteration of the ordinance, two very different things, and 3 different things maybe, so.
And I have no issue with low crop covers. If it's going to be, 2-3 off the ground, 2-4 feet off the ground, I have no issue with that. I kind of like what Bruno had mentioned this morning, Supervisor Spotty had mentioned a little while ago about, maybe if it's not high enough for headroom or 5 feet or less, we don't have an issue because now we don't have people in there. That's the main safety thing of the building code is getting people in, getting fire personnel in, getting people out. I do have a definition of building from the fire code if you'd like me to read it.
Where were you earlier?
Okay. And it mentioned structures, so.
Okay. Lloyd?
Yes, so procedurally, the amendment option is still there. It would have to be amended quite specifically in terms of the provisions in order to move forward, in order to proceed with the second reading of the ordinance. The other option, of course, is if the issues that have been discussed need to be fleshed out some more, the other option is to continue, by motion, continue the ordinance to be continued at a specific date and time so that more of these issues can be discussed further for a possible presentation of the board at a later point in time, specified date and time under the continuance.
Of everything that we've talked about, which, can you remind me which part of it would need to come back as an amendment?
I believe right now, based on the most recent discussion, it would be Section 6, Section 2.6 of the ordinance, which as drafted, as presently drafted, it states multiple structures have a 3-foot minimum fire separation distance between structures, and initially, at the beginning of this item, community development had also some an additional clause to be provided to that as which led to further discussion.
Supervisor Spatier.
I got to take you up on that offer. It's no longer a structure if it's less than 4 feet, 5 feet?
Yes. What I would,
because I mean, if we can add that in there, then that would simplify for those that are doing autoflower, those that are just trying to get some starters going, and then they take it off, and nobody has a problem.
And I think, and in my opinion, I would say that the building code specifically exempts those type of crop covers. We're trying to expand that and say, well, this is how we're going to interpret this a little bit to try and make it for larger crop covers hoop houses so they can get a bigger hoop house, and it'll work for people that have these. And with the idea of, hey, this is a pre-designed thing and it's safe and we're not going to have any issues with it. But I think specifically the smaller crop covers are exactly what is specified in the code when it says shade cloth structures constructed for nursery or agricultural purposes, not included service systems. I believe that is exactly what they're talking about, is little crop covers going over strawberries, somebody's garden outside, something like that. Now, the code allows me to, I got another section over here that allows me to, where is it here? The building official is hereby authorized and directed to enforce the provisions of this code. The building official shall have the authority to render interpretations of the code and to adopt policies and procedures in order to clarify the application of its provisions. So basically, we were trying to come up with a design that we feel is safe to where we can get you guys, get the cannabis industry a hoop house with little resistance. They don't have to come see me. They don't have to pay a fee if they comply with this safe design. I think it exceeds this number 10 just on, I don't think you can just take this number 10 and say it applies to any hoop house, because they're talking, in my opinion, about something, like we said, that's not meant for people to be inside of. Now, I think I have the ability per the code to say, well, my judgment is that this little bit bigger hoop house we would accept, but it would need to comply with this. But if we said anything under 5 feet, I have no problem with that.
So we have a minimum of 5 feet and a maximum of 12 feet.
Yes, yes. And anything under 5 feet, I think, would just be there's no permit. You wouldn't even need to come see us.
I think that's the conversation we should have started with earlier. That would have been awesome. Could we add that as just item number 15? If hoop house is less than 5 feet tall, it is exempt from this building structure permit?
The building official would be good with that.
I like the building official now.
I still prefer I still don't, not too keen on reducing that extra 3 foot of fire separation, though, just so everybody understands my position and my stance.
I would actually go to where you are on that stand if we make that change, that anything under 5 feet does not require anything at this moment in time. And again, at this moment in time, without the conversation of bringing in ag, I would say at this moment it's still specific to cannabis, with the continuation conversation on how do we get there to make sure everybody can have access to these types of structures.
Instead of adding it as a number 13, I would actually place it in the beginning sentence under 6.25, where it says an exempt agricultural building permit, blah, 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 may be issued. I'd start with a description. Yeah, hoop structure less than 5 feet is exempt per this, and then put the Title 24 Part 2 code citation there. For structures over 5 feet in height, the following would apply. Rather than stick it down in the meat of it, let's just put it right up front so people know ahead of time.
Lloyd?
Just as a point of clarification, that would be 5 feet in height?
Yes.
Is that correct? Okay. So amendments can be made, and we can proceed if the board wishes to do so with the first reading of the ordinance as amended. It would need to be specifically identified as to where the amendments would take place, so we could give it a shot to see if this can proceed further onto a second reading if the board wishes to do so.
Supervisor Green?
I think the better mousetrap would be continue to a date and time center certain, and I would look to staff for recommending that date and time. There's lots of little things to bring back, and we want to make sure everyone's reading from the same playbook and has the opportunity to read it. So we want them to do their best homework. So I know it's another week, but another week is just another week. So what are we looking at next week? And do we have anything on the calendar that would allow for a continuation?
No.
No?
We don't. And I'm sorry, but if we don't do this today, it's probably not going to come back until June because of what our calendars are, and we've got traveling people. CAO Parker, would you agree?
I would agree. I'm just looking at it right now.
It's a monster of a month.
And the board has 5 evaluations
Interviews.
Interviews, sorry, interviews.
Yeah, next Tuesday is not going to be possible, then you're traveling, then you're traveling. So, let's.
As long as can we get a review of
Yeah,
what
let's
we're changing?
review everything.
Absolutely.
That way I can say yes.
So if I understand correctly, the board would approve a first reading in title only with the following amendments.
Okay.
Specification in 6.2, subsection 6.25, that this permit applies only to hoop structures greater than 5 feet in height. In various sections of the ordinance, I'm sorry, I can't really narrow it down further than that, it would specify that this applies to cannabis permits. On section,
Section
on section
2A1.
So 6.25.2A1, structure is made entirely of PVC or similar, or material of similar weight, tubing, and a maximum of 10 mil plastic or shade cloth. And then it sounds like it's still no amendment to 6.25.2, number 6. No recommended amendment adding the clause with the maximum distance from any exterior portion of the structure being no more than 150 feet from a compliant fire access road. Is that correct? That is not to be added?
Say that again?
Yeah, okay. So, so I am just asking for clarification on the section regarding the 3-foot minimum fire separation distance between structures, that the board wants to approve it without further amendment, which would be adding in the reference of the requirement of the fire code. That is not included, or
Without this, right?
correct. If there's no amendment, it will read as multiple structures have a 3-foot minimum fire separation distance between structures.
And so we're not adding
Correct.
this. Yes, correct.
That concludes my listed amendments. I could get everything specifically except where it's going to refer to cannabis permits only, but I can tell you it's going to be in the title. It's going to be in subsection 6.25 title. It will also be referenced. Actually, that's pretty much going to start me off, and then if there's anything else that needs to be, I can hear clicks from county council, so I'm going to defer to them.
Okay. So on the references to cannabis cultivation, I may have some specific lines amendments to that, starting with the title. Under line 4 on the title, where it would read an ordinance amending Chapter 5, Section 6 of the Lake County Code, adding Section 6.25 relating to permitting temporary hoop structures for cannabis cultivation. That's what it would read. Further downwards, around from lines 8 through 9 of that same page, on the second whereas, it would state, whereas the Board of Supervisors desires to add Section 6.25 to Chapter 5 of the Lake County Ordinance to allow for permitting of temporary hoop structures for cannabis cultivation. That's how it would read. And then further down on the fourth whereas, around lines 11 through 13, it would read, whereas the 2022 California Building Code, Title 24, Part 2, Section 105.210 allows for exemption from permit requirements for shade cloth structures constructed for cannabis cultivation, not including service systems.
I would request this not be amended since it's wording straight out of the code.
Okay.
The code allows for exemption from permit requirements for shade, and this is a direct quote, shade cloth structures constructed for nursery or agricultural purposes, not including service systems. I would defer, of course, to county council, but that's why that wording is that way.
And that is fine. So further down on the same page, around lines 22 to, around lines 23, where it cites, in quotes, 6.25 temporary hoop structures for cannabis cultivation. That would be the amendment. And then the next line, lines 24, 25, that same page, under that same quote, would state an exempt agricultural building permit for temporary hoop structures for cannabis cultivation may be issued with the approval of the agricultural commissioner and community development director and subject to the following requirements. That would be the amendment to that portion. And I believe on the second page under sub C, so it would be 6.251C. It would be amended to read, in addition to those conducting agricultural operations, applicants with an approved cannabis cultivation permit from the County of Lake are eligible to apply for an exempt agricultural building permit for temporary hoop structures for cannabis cultivation within the approved cultivation plan. And then sub E on that same page, lines 13 through 16, it would read, an applicant applying for an exempt agricultural building permit for temporary hoop structures, as described in this section, is responsible for obtaining any other necessary state and/or county permits and complying with all requirements of such permits, including but not limited to any local fire district permitting requirements for temporary structures. And moving on to sub F, would state, an applicant applying for an exempt agricultural building permit for temporary hoop structures, as described in this section, shall obtain and provide to the Community Development Director proof of a current surety bond prior to issuance of permit. And those are all the amendments that we spotted consistent with the discussion today.
Line 24 on page 2.
Yes, that's correct. So section 6.252A, it should be amended to state, an exempt agricultural building permit shall be issued if all of the following requirements are met.
Okay. Supervisor Green, did you have something else? Nope. Okay. Action.
Did we kill this one yet?
Sausage. We made sausage today. Who is going to?
I'll do it. Let me
Okay.
try. I'll move that the board approve the first reading of this ordinance as amended and advance the draft ordinance as amended to the next board meeting. Or that would be first reading at the next meeting, right? Because of the substantial amendments, okay.
Right, and there would be, the board may want to consider doing two separate motions. The motion to approve the first reading and as amended to be read in title only, and then the clerk of the board would read the title. And then the second motion would be to approve the draft ordinance as amended to be advanced at the next Board of Supervisors meeting for consideration and possible adoption. So going back to the first motion, it would be a motion to approve the first reading of the ordinance as amended to be read in title only.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Let's hear it, Johanna.
Further would move to advance
right.
the draft
Nope.
ordinance.
I got it.
Nope.
Hold on.
It's an ordinance amending Chapter 5, Section 6 of the Lake County Code, adding Section 6.25 relating to permitting temporary hoop structures for cannabis cultivation.
Then the second motion would be to approve the draft ordinance as amended motion to approve the draft ordinance as amended be advanced to the next Board of Supervisors meeting for consideration and possible adoption. And the date has to be more than 5 dates from today, so next Tuesday would be, would fit that criteria.
So moved.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
And so, for clarification, there needs to be an identified date and time. So the date would be May 9, and the time would be
9:30.
Why does it have to be a time? Oh, is it a public hearing? I thought second ordinances, most of the time, our second readings are on consent.
You want to put this on, okay.
I don't want to talk about it again.
Consent.
And so I think on the motion, we are,
What? Amended to May 9th?
Yeah, so moved as amended.
All in favor?
Aye.
Amended? Opposed? Motion passes. Thank you, everyone, for the months and months of work on this and for following along through these sessions. We are finished
I think so.
with our open session items. We'll be moving into closed session. We have item 9.1, public employee evaluation from our Health Services Director. So we will be moving into that. Thank you for joining us.